The world of lawyers and judges has always fascinated me. That's when I came to know that there is a book called Why the Constitution Matters, written by Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, had been released by Penguin Random House in September of 2025. I immediately ordered a copy and had it delivered to me on the 21st of September 2025. The book's back cover showed me a market price of rupees 899. However, Amazon gave me a good discount and I got it for merely rupees 628. It took me nearly 20 days to read the entire book, and here I am proudly telling you something about it. It's going to be a long review, so have patience, or you can listen to it in parts or listen to it while you're walking and so on. The book has 489 pages of content, which is divided into an introduction and 34 chapters. Each of the 34 chapters are based on a set of selected speeches which Justice Chandrachud delivered at various public functions. And my word, the way Justice Chandrachud has expounded the various topics concerning the Indian Constitution, like democracy, free speech, pluralism, gender, environmental governance, dissent, and landmark judgments that have shaped modern India, it really took my breath away. It is extraordinary that the whole nation and its functioning is based on this book called the Constitution. And that this book, the Constitution of India, is not just a set of pages and words, it is a living, growing experience of a nation for guiding its sustenance. That we are governed by rule of law with the Constitution as a backbone is something which we take for granted, and yet it is that book which gives us our rights and duties and makes us feel so unique as an Indian in a country called India. All this is explained from various angles by Justice Chandrachud in his whole book, Why the Constitution Matters. In fact, I never read anything about the Constitution beyond the school civics class, which taught me about the fundamental rights and the system of governance in India with the legislature, executive, and the judiciary. Mercifully, they never talked about the media, which is anyway such a shame on the democracy of India. But after reading the book, Why the Constitution Matters, I've promised to myself that I would sit down and read the Constitution of India cover to cover firsthand and try to understand it as well. You also suddenly realize that you must be very alert as a citizen whenever an amendment to the Constitution of India is made, because that has the potential to affect our Indian society as a whole in current and future times. While the Supreme Court is always alert that any amendment to the Constitution which alters its fundamental structure is unlawful, we as citizens should be watchful about what changes the legislature is even proposing to the Constitution from time to time, because that defines fundamentally our lives as an Indian citizen. And based on that, we should determine what are the motives of the legislature, and that should be an input to which button we press in the next elections, a right of universal adult suffrage given to us by the Constitution. And that is why the Constitution matters. I suppose even the books ought to have a hook to bait you as a reader. Chapter 1 does that, very adroitly titled The Sounds and Silences of Our Constitution. It talks about when the Constitution is silent about a particular aspect of the law and how the interpretation by the judiciary can lead to the so-called door-closing silence or a door-opening silence. It beautifully explains, for instance, the door-closing silence where Justice Chandrachud was himself faced with a significant constitutional question about the interpretation of Article 213, which deals with the ordinance-making power. That article in a particular clause states that if an ordinance lapses or is disapproved by the legislature, it shall cease to operate. The question that Justice Chandrachud was faced with was, what happens to the actions taken before the ordinance ceased to operate? Does cease to operate mean that it saves the actions taken under the ordinance before its lapse or disapproval? So this is a classic case of constitutional silence. Justice Chandrachud's bench provided the sound to the silence, providing an important constitutional value, legislative control over ordinances. What that sound was, I won't tell you. For that, you'll have to read that book yourself. Suffice it to say that the chapter 1, the sounds and silences of our Constitution, immediately grips you and you want to read non-stop after that. Now, let me be honest. The book is not a story. You really have to pay attention to it. You have to be curious. You have to follow the serious logic of Justice Chandrachud. You have to read it in peace. You won't get the kicks of a fiction work in the book, but the book would speak gently to you, telling you how you are governed, what affects your daily life, what the Indian nation state was really like at the time of independence, and how the rule of law has steered us all and kept us together without disintegrating. You marvel at the language and the logic at display by the author, and you really feel proud that at least the judiciary was in the hands of a well educated person who had such a rounded perspective about all the aspects of the Constitution. If everybody in the legislature and executive, but primarily in the legislature, is also having that level of education, our country could be so different from what it is today. Everybody from the legal profession, I mean all the judges, be it sessions, district, high courts or Supreme Court, and all the lawyers at all the levels must read this book and get inspired by it and learn from it to fight for justice and deliver the same. For those of us who are not from the legal profession, the book is equally a gift. But you must have the curiosity and patience, curiosity to learn about topics which we are ignorant about, and patience to go through the chapters, and only then it would be rewarding. Sadly, curiosity these days lends itself into the patience for watching the reels of maximum 3 minutes before moving on to another. If you're in that zone, then you may buy the book, but you would struggle to finish it. I myself read the book diligently over the course of 15 to 20 days, covering a couple of chapters each day before going to bed, and it gave me a newfound inspiration to read the Indian Constitution in this lifetime. Talking about the Indian legal profession in the chapter 3, Justice Chandrachud points out that since national law schools were set up in 1986, there has been only one national law school graduate who has made it to the higher judiciary. At the same time, in 2014, 26% of the partnerships of the top 6 corporate law firms in India were occupied by graduates of the same national law school. He also laments about the lack of pro bono culture in India's law firms. I must say that I did manage to find some proofreading errors in the book, but those can be forgiven because it's a heavy book and the poor proofreader may not be understanding the context very well. And as Justice Chandrachud so generously concludes in the end that all the errors and omissions are his. And that humility shows throughout in the book, where you don't feel like being instructed by a tutor, but instead get a feeling of a companion holding your hand and talking very gently to you, but showing you the mirror and the reality around yourself all the time. And that's where the book becomes fascinating to read. In the chapter titled The Rule of Law in India, Justice Chandrachud invokes the following words from Dr. Rajendra Prasad, India's first president, while moving the motion for the adoption of the Constitution in the Constituent Assembly. Quote, "Whatever the Constitution may or may not provide, the welfare of the country will depend upon the way in which the country is administered. That will depend upon the men who administer it. After all, a constitution, like a machine, is a lifeless thing. It acquires life because of the men who control it and operate it." Unquote. Justice Chandrachud then concludes the chapter of the rule of law in India that the future of the rule of law in India will depend upon the commitment of those who hold the fate of our institutions. And that leaves you brooding as a book freezes in your hand for a while and you think about the times you're living in. Let's remind ourselves that Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, full name Dhananjay Yashwant Chandrachud, was born in 1959 and served as the 50th Chief Justice of India from 9th of November 2022 to 10th of November 2024. He was appointed a judge of the Supreme Court of India in May 2016. He also previously served as the Chief Justice of the Allahabad High Court from 2013 to 2016 and as a judge of the Bombay High Court from 2000 to 2013. In his book, Why Constitution Matters, in the chapter titled Justice as a Narrative, he beautifully describes the analogy between law and stories, invoking Ronald Dworkin, an American jurist, stating that law is like a chain novel. successive interpreters and composers of novels all work on the subsequent chapters and build on what has already been written. Similarly, precedents serve to form a chain of coherence which are purported to limit the discretion that each judge has as the body of the precedent grows. The whole concept of justice as a narrative is a very creative idea which should inspire the judges of our country. In the chapter titled Inventing and Reinventing Constitutional Identity, he clearly mentions that while flexibility is necessary in the evolution of the Constitution, but certain features cannot be eroded because that would take away from the basic premise or value on which the constitutional identity was created. He goes on to mention that some examples of these features which cannot be eroded are the separation of powers, federalism, and secularism. Now that sends out a clear message to everybody living in the current times where there is so much talk about whether the nation should be declared a particular kind of Rashtra based on the religion. Who could have imagined that even art could play a role in the interpretation and upholding of the Constitution? In the chapter titled Visualizing the Constitution Through Artistic Prisms, he attempts to locate the role of art in Indian and global history as not just a cultural facet of human life, but a fundamentally transformative medium for upholding a mirror to the society governed by the Constitution. This is a chapter titled Promoting Constitutional Morality Beyond Courtrooms. Justice Chandrachud reminds us that the Constitution was not envisaged as a mere legal document, but as a moral guiding force for citizens. He reminds us of Ambedkar's words that the Constitution is not a mere lawyer's document. It is a vehicle of life, and its spirit is always a spirit of age. This goes on to show how much the Constitution means to the judges like Justice Chandrachud, and also goes on to show how much it should mean to us as a citizen of India. It really is an eye-opener and encourages us to read the Constitution, which I plan to do soon. Clearly, Justice Chandrachud is into music, novels and movies, while he quotes extensively from lawyers and judges and of course the various past cases in the courts, but he also uses examples from Harry Potter, Bob Dylan and movies like Shawshank Redemption. Clearly he is an eclectic personality who watches a lot of movies and listens to Western music. In that sense, he comes across as a modern rocking judge, if you will, which makes him connect well with the general audience, and that shows in his writing. By all means, the writing is formal, and you do have to refer to the dictionary now and then for words like recitivism, iconoclast, epistemological, and allegory, but that in itself is a learning experience in the book. There's a beautiful chapter on revisiting penal philosophy, reformative justice in India. He quotes Justice Krishnan Iyer, stating that our legal system, including the police, is anti-Dalit and anti-poor. The law barks at all but bites only the poor, the powerless, the illiterate, the ignorant. The whole chapter is quite radical in its propositions, and you have to read it yourself to get an idea of the suggested relationship between the victim and the criminal for a better world. In the chapter titled Journalism in the New Age, he mentions categorically that the media is the fourth pillar in the conception of the state and thus an integral component of democracy. The media must be able to ask difficult questions to the establishment or speak truth to power. I'm sure he must be pained to see the state of media in our country. If I ever get a chance to speak to him, I would love to ask his opinion on the way the mainstream media is operating in our country. In the chapter titled Supreme Court at 75, he mentions that the Constitution has safeguards for an independent judiciary. However, these safeguards are not in themselves sufficient to ensure an independent judiciary. An independent judiciary does not merely mean the insulation of the institution from the executive and legislature, but also the independence of individual judges in the performance of their roles as judges. He goes on to mention that the art of judging must be free of social and political pressure and from the inherent biases human beings hold. On this note, I personally feel that Justice Chandrachud had a lapse of judgment when he invited the Prime Minister of India to his residence for Ganesh Puja. It was not good optics, it was not walking the talk, and could have been avoided, and it did set a wrong precedent. People may like his judgments, but I saw his invitation to the executive for an act of worship at his residence as a lapse of judgment, and hopefully it never gets repeated. In the end, the book proves very rewarding and gives you a perspective about law, lawyers, judges, and the society they operate in. Justice Chandrachud really gives a beautiful summary of his whole exposition towards the end of the chapter titled The Rule of Law in a Constitutional Democracy, and I quote, "So much as we as law students, lawyers, and judges focus on the rule of law and the importance of the adjudicatory institutions of the states in enhancing the rule of law, we need to realize that there is so much of life beyond the law, and we understand the law when we understand the life which exists beyond the law." Unquote. Now you go read Why the Constitution Matters by Justice D.Y. Chandrachud and tell me about it.